The girl was auctioned while bleeding after childbirth, but one rancher bought her just for her. She lay on a narrow cot in a tiny, dimly lit room, exhausted beyond imagination. Only a few days had passed since she had given birth, and every movement brought a sharp ache that shot through her body. Her arms cradled a small, fragile bundle, the tiny life she had brought into the world, a boy with dark, curious eyes who blinked up at her with the innocence only a newborn could carry. Amira's mind wandered as she looked at him. She wondered how anyone could take such a small, perfect life and pair it with a world so cruel. She thought about her own life, about the endless struggles that had led her here. Her family had abandoned her long ago, unable or unwilling to provide the protection every young woman needed. And in her village, the rules were harsh, unbending. Women who were vulnerable without support were often treated as possessions rather than people. Amira had heard the whispers for years, but nothing had prepared her for the reality that awaited her now. The pain in her body was not just physical. It was also the ache of fear, the kind that never leaves completely, lurking in the corners of the mind. She could hear the voices of people moving outside her door, the chatter of villagers going about their morning, unaware, or perhaps indifferent to her suffering. Her heart pounded with dread, knowing what was coming. She had been warned by others who had endured it, the auction. The cruel public event where women like her were sold to the highest bidder. For some, it was a matter of survival. For others, it was a punishment. Amira tried to steady her breathing, to remind herself that she was still alive, that she still had her child, that there might be hope. But each step she took toward the door was heavy, each heartbeat a reminder of her exhaustion. When she finally emerged into the sunlight, the reality hit her with a force she could not deny. The village square was already crowded, people milling about with curiosity and expectation. The platform where the auction would take place stood tall and imposing, a symbol of power that seemed to hum with the energy of greed and cruelty. The villagers' eyes fell on her, some with curiosity, some with judgment, some with an unsettling amusement. Amira could feel their gazes, heavy and invasive, as though they were weighing her worth like a commodity. She clutched her child closer, hoping he would not feel the fear that gripped her so tightly. She knew she had no choice. Resistance was futile in a place where tradition and law were cruelly intertwined. Women like her had few allies, and those who tried to intervene often faced danger themselves. As she was led onto the platform, the voices grew louder. Bids were shouted out, rising in a rhythm that made her stomach churn. She looked down at her small hands, the skin bruised and raw from labor, and felt a deep, burning anger. How could they see her as an object? How could they ignore the pain, the life she had just created, the sheer strength it had taken to survive childbirth? Her mind flashed to the baby in her arms, and she whispered a promise she wasn't sure she could keep. "I will protect you, no matter what." Some of the villagers pointed and whispered among themselves. There was excitement in the air, a twisted kind of spectacle that treated human life as entertainment. Amira fought to keep her composure, her pride, her humanity. Every fiber of her being wanted to cry out, to scream at the injustice, to demand recognition not as a thing to be sold, but as a person who deserved respect and safety. Yet the world she lived in was not kind, and her voice, if raised, would not have been enough to change it. She felt herself growing dizzy as the bids escalated. Men's voices shouted numbers that made her feel as though her life had been reduced to currency. Each new bid made her stomach turn, but also sparked a flicker of determination. She could not let despair take her completely. Her child depended on her, and even in the face of such cruelty, she would hold on to hope. Hope had been her anchor before, and now, more than ever, it was the only thing keeping her upright. Through the haze of fear and exhaustion, Amira noticed one man standing apart from the rest of the crowd. Unlike the others, he did not shout or laugh or point. He simply watched. There was a quietness about him that made him different, something in his eyes that seemed to recognize her not as an object, but as a person. For a moment, she allowed herself to wonder if maybe, just maybe, someone could see her worth. It was a dangerous thought, one that made her pulse quicken with both hope and uncertainty. As the auctioneer continued, she felt her legs trembling. The platform seemed unsteady beneath her, but she stood firm, gripping her child. She had survived childbirth in near impossible conditions. She had faced hunger, abandonment, and fear. This too, she told herself, she could endure. And yet deep inside, a part of her longed for rescue, for someone to step forward and recognize her strength, not her weakness. Time moved slowly, each moment stretching into an eternity. Amira's mind wandered back to her own mother, to the stories she had been told as a child, stories of courage and survival. She remembered the lessons she had learned in whispered words, in stolen moments of safety, lessons that had taught her how to endure, how to hide, how to hope. Those lessons were coming back to her now, giving her the courage to stand, to face the crowd, to remain upright even as her body screamed for rest. The morning sun climbed higher, burning hot on her skin, mixing with the sweat and tears she had not even realized she had shed. Around her, the villagers continued their bidding, their eyes greedy, their voices loud. She felt her heart pounding, a drumbeat of fear and determination. She could not let herself crumble, not here, not now, not in front of her child. Every breath she took was a reminder that she had survived so much worse, and that survival meant fighting, even when the fight seemed impossible. And then, in that moment of overwhelming despair, she noticed the man again. He was still watching, still quiet, still different. There was something in his gaze that made her pause, a glimmer of humanity in a world that had offered so little. For the first time since the auction had begun, a small seed of hope took root in her heart. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone in this world would see her as less than she was. Maybe someone could see her as she truly was, strong, determined, and worthy of life and dignity. Amira held her child close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her own. She whispered to him, not knowing if anyone could hear, "We will survive this. Somehow, we will." The words were barely audible, but they carried with them the weight of every hardship she had endured. They were a promise, a prayer, a defiance against the cruelty that surrounded her. The crowd's voices rose again, bidding, shouting, the rhythm unrelenting. And yet, amidst the chaos, Amira felt a strange calm. She would face whatever came next with the same determination that had carried her through childbirth, through hunger, through fear. She would not break. She would not bow. For her child, for herself, she would endure. And perhaps, in some unexpected way, salvation might come from the most unlikely place. The auction continued, and Amira's story hung in the balance. Every bid, every shout, every gaze was a test of her strength, a challenge to her will. And though the world around her seemed harsh and unfeeling, a small, quiet part of her believed that maybe, just maybe, someone would see her, truly see her, and choose her not for what she could provide, but for who she was. And in that glimmer of hope, she found the courage to stand a little taller, to breathe a little steadier, to hold her child a little closer, and to face the impossible with a heart that refused to surrender. The day grew hotter, and the crowd in the village square became louder, their excitement building as the auction continued. Amira stood on the platform, her arms still holding her tiny child close to her chest. The baby had begun to stir, sensing the tension and fear that hung in the air like a heavy fog. Every shout of a number from the villagers made Amira's stomach twist with dread. She felt like an object, a piece of property to be passed around for the highest price. And yet, amidst the chaos, she clung to the small flame of hope she had discovered earlier, the hope that someone might see her for who she truly was, not for what she represented to the crowd. The auctioneer, a tall, stern man with a voice that cut through the noise, called out the next bid. 500 coins, 500. he shouted, slamming his hand down on the wooden podium with a force that echoed across the square. The crowd cheered, their voices blending into a single, oppressive roar. Amira felt her body tremble, not just from exhaustion, but from the weight of humiliation and fear. She pressed her child closer, feeling the soft warmth of his skin against her chest, drawing strength from his small presence. As she looked around, she noticed the faces of the villagers. Some were men, their eyes sharp and calculating as they measured her worth. Some were women, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, judgment, and indifference. A few children stared wide-eyed, unaware of the cruelty surrounding them but sensing the tension that made the adults behave strangely. Amira's heart ached, not just for herself, but for the baby in her arms. She had brought him into the world with so much hope, and now they were both caught in a situation that felt like a living nightmare. Through the crowd, Amira's eyes searched for a sign of compassion, a face that might offer even a glimmer of mercy. And then she saw him, the man she had noticed before. Elias, the rancher, stood at the edge of the square, his posture calm, his eyes steady. Unlike the others, he did not shout, point, or jeer. He simply watched, observing the auction with a quiet intensity. There was something about him that set him apart, a sense of purpose and humanity that seemed almost out of place in the rough, harsh environment of the village square. Amira couldn't explain why, but the sight of Elias gave her a small measure of comfort. Even as her body ached and her spirit trembled, she felt a sense of connection, as if he understood, even from afar, the pain and fear that she carried. She held her child closer, feeling his tiny heart beating against hers, and whispered softly, maybe someone will help us." The words felt fragile, like glass, but in that fragile hope, she found the courage to keep standing. The auctioneer's voice rose again, calling out the next bid. 600 coins, 600. The crowd erupted, their excitement growing louder, their voices more demanding. Amira could feel the heat of their attention, the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on her like a physical force. She closed her eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She reminded herself that she had survived childbirth, that she had endured abandonment and hunger, and that she could endure this as well. She could not let despair take her completely, not with her child depending on her. As the bidding continued, Amira's mind raced. She wondered what her life would be like if she were sold to one of the men shouting in the crowd. Would she be forced to work endlessly, treated as nothing more than labor? Would her child be taken from her, separated from the only person who loved him unconditionally? The thought made her chest tighten, and she pressed her baby closer, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against her own. She whispered promises to him that she didn't know if she could keep, but the words gave her strength. "I will protect you. I will keep you safe." No matter what. The crowd's energy was relentless. People shouted higher bids, each one making Amira's heart pound faster. She felt as if she were trapped in a storm, the waves of greed and cruelty crashing over her with no relief. Her arms ached from holding her baby, her legs shook from exhaustion, and yet she remained upright. She reminded herself that every second she survived was a victory, that every moment she held onto hope was a triumph against the cruelty that surrounded her. Through the noise, Amira's eyes never left Elias. He remained calm, his gaze fixed on her, unshaken by the chaos around him. There was a quiet determination in his eyes, a sense that he was considering something deeply important. Amira wondered what he was thinking, if he would simply watch as the auction continued, or if he would step forward and do something that might change the course of her life. The thought made her heart race, a mixture of fear and anticipation swirling inside her. The auctioneer's voice cut through the air again, louder this time. 700 coins, 700. The crowd erupted in cheers, and Amira felt a wave of panic rise within her. She had no control over what was happening, no way to stop the relentless tide of greed. All she could do was hold her child and pray that someone would intervene, that someone would see her not as a commodity, but as a person deserving of care and protection. And then, as if answering her silent plea, Elias stepped forward. His presence immediately drew attention, the crowd turning to see who was making such a bold move. He did not shout, did not demand, but simply raised his hand and called out a number. "I will pay 1,000 coins," he said, his voice steady and clear. The auctioneer blinked, momentarily taken aback before acknowledging the bid. The crowd murmured, some in disbelief, others in anger at the sudden challenge. Amira's heart leapt. She could hardly believe what was happening. Someone had intervened. Someone had recognized her worth beyond the numbers being shouted across the square. She felt a mixture of relief and cautious hope, unsure if this was real or just another cruel twist of fate. She held her child tightly, feeling his warmth and life against her own, and allowed herself a small, trembling smile. Elias did not stop there. He remained at the edge of the platform, his eyes meeting hers briefly. There was no judgment in his gaze, no expectation of servitude or obedience. There was only a quiet acknowledgement of her humanity, of her strength, and of the courage it had taken for her to survive everything she had endured. In that moment, Amira realized that not all people were cruel, that not all hands would exploit her weakness, and that hope, fragile though it was, could still exist even in the darkest of places. The auctioneer's hammer fell, signaling the end of the bidding. Amira was sold, not to the highest bidder among the greedy crowd, but to someone who had seen her for who she truly was. Relief washed over her in waves, mingled with lingering fear and disbelief. She could hardly process the reality that someone had chosen her, not for labor, not for status, but simply because he wanted to protect her and her child. As Elias stepped forward to guide her from the platform, Amira's legs felt unsteady beneath her. She had survived childbirth, abandonment, and public humiliation, and now she was stepping into a new chapter, one that held the promise of safety and care. She held her child close, whispering again, "We are going to be okay. We are going to survive this together." The villagers watched in silence, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others muttering under their breath. But Amira no longer cared about their opinions. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a sense of control, a measure of dignity restored. She had endured the impossible, and now she had been given a chance at life beyond the cruelty of the auction. Elias led her gently through the crowd, careful not to rush her or cause alarm. His calm presence was a stark contrast to the chaos she had just endured. Amira felt a strange mixture of gratitude and caution. She did not yet know if she could trust him completely, but for now, she allowed herself to believe that he meant no harm, that his intentions were genuine. She would have to take it one step at a time, learning to trust again after so much betrayal and fear. As they walked toward the place where she would begin this new chapter of her life, Amira looked down at her baby, his tiny hands curling around her fingers. She whispered softly, "This is the start of something different. We will heal, we will survive, and we will live." The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of every hardship she had endured, every fear she had faced, and every flicker of hope that had kept her alive. And in that moment, amidst the dust and noise of the village square, amidst the remnants of fear and despair, Amira felt the first true sense of relief she had known in weeks. Someone had seen her, truly seen her, and had chosen her not for what she could do, but for who she was. And that choice, simple as it seemed, was the beginning of a journey that would change her life forever. The ride from the village to the ranch was long and quiet. Amira sat on the back of the horse, holding her baby tightly against her chest. The sun was high, and the air was warm, carrying the scent of dust, grass, and the faint aroma of wildflowers. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the dangers he had narrowly escaped, unaware of the cruelty that had surrounded them just hours before. For Amira, every bump of the horse and every rustle of the trees seemed amplified. Her mind raced with thoughts, memories, and fears, but most of all, she felt a strange, cautious hope that she hadn't dared to feel before. Elias rode beside her, silent but attentive. He did not speak unnecessarily, respecting her space and her exhaustion. Amira noticed small gestures, a gentle tilt of his head, a watchful glance at the baby, a careful adjustment of the horse's pace. It was different from anything she had known. People had always treated her with suspicion or cruelty, and here was someone who showed concern without demanding anything in return. That small kindness felt foreign but comforting. The ranch came into view as the path wound through the hills. It was expansive, surrounded by fields and pastures, with wooden fences stretching across the horizon. A large, sturdy house stood at the center, smoke curling from the chimney, hinting at warmth and safety inside. Amira felt a mixture of awe and fear. The ranch was beautiful, but it was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar places could hide dangers she wasn't ready to face. Yet the sight of it also brought relief. Here, perhaps, she could finally rest, recover, and protect her child. As they arrived, Elias helped her dismount gently. Amira's legs wobbled beneath her, weak from the days of exhaustion and fear. She clutched her baby tightly, stepping carefully toward the house. The front door opened before she could knock, and a woman appeared, smiling warmly. "Welcome," the woman said softly, her voice kind. "You must be Amira. Come inside. We have prepared a room for you and your little one." Amira hesitated, unsure if she could trust anyone so quickly, but Elias' reassuring nod and the genuine warmth in the woman's eyes encouraged her to step inside. The house smelled of bread and clean linens, of safety and care, a stark contrast to the dusty, cruel village she had left behind. She was led to a small room with a comfortable bed, soft blankets, and a cradle for her baby. For the first time in days, she felt a flicker of relief, a sense that perhaps she could finally breathe. The first days at the ranch were difficult. Amira's body was sore and weak, still recovering from childbirth. Her arms ached from holding her baby constantly, and her legs were stiff from the long ride. But Elias and the woman, whose name was Clara, were patient and understanding. They brought food, helped with the baby, and encouraged Amira to rest. Every small act of kindness was a balm to her spirit, which had been battered by fear and cruelty for so long. Amira found herself observing the ranch carefully. The fields were filled with animals, horses, cows, chickens, all cared for with attention and love. The work was hard, but it was honest, meaningful, and life-giving. She began to help where she could, starting slowly, feeding the animals and learning the rhythm of the ranch. Each task, simple though it seemed, gave her a sense of purpose and normalcy she hadn't known in years. She was not being forced to work. She was helping because she wanted to, and because it reminded her that she could be strong, independent, and capable. Elias gave her space but also guidance. He never ordered her to do anything, never made her feel obligated to repay him for saving her. Instead, he taught her how to care for the animals, how to manage the household tasks, and how to take small steps toward healing. He asked about her comfort, her needs, and her hopes, always listening, never judging. Amira began to realize that he saw her not as someone to control, but as a human being capable of making her own choices. That realization was both empowering and frightening, but it gave her courage she hadn't felt in a long time. The nights were the hardest. Darkness brought back memories of the auction, the cruel stares, the shouting, and the fear that had gripped her for so long. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night, the baby crying softly, her body tense with lingering fear. But Elias and Clara were patient. They stayed nearby when needed, offering quiet reassurance and practical help, never intruding unnecessarily. Slowly, the nights became easier, and Amira began to feel a sense of security she hadn't thought possible. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Amira sat on the porch with her baby asleep beside her. She watched the sky change from gold to deep purple, feeling the gentle breeze on her face. Elias joined her, sitting quietly at a respectful distance. He didn't speak at first, letting the moment settle between them. Then, gently, he said, "You have been through so much. And yet here you are. You are stronger than you realize." Amira looked at him, surprised by the words. No one had ever said such things to her, and certainly not without expecting something in return. Tears welled in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and gratitude. She nodded quietly, finding it hard to put her feelings into words. Finally, she whispered, I want to survive, for him, for my child. That is all I care about." Elias nodded, understanding completely. "And you will, you both will. This place is safe. And I will make sure it stays that way." His words carried a promise, not of perfection but of protection, of a chance to rebuild what had been broken. Amira felt a small spark of hope ignite within her, a fragile yet powerful feeling that perhaps her life could be more than survival, that it could be filled with care, trust, and love. Over the following weeks, Amira's confidence grew. She began to care for her baby more confidently, learning to anticipate his needs, to soothe him, and to marvel at his small achievements. The first smile, the tiny grasp of her finger, the soft coos that filled the room with life. She also became more involved in the daily rhythm of the ranch, learning to ride horses, feed the animals, and manage small tasks around the house. Each accomplishment, no matter how small, reinforced her sense of worth and ability. Elias observed quietly, offering guidance only when necessary. He respected her independence, understanding that her strength had been forged through hardship. He never pressured her to do more than she was ready for, never forced her into tasks beyond her capability. Instead, he allowed her to grow at her own pace, recognizing that true healing required patience, respect, and understanding. Amira also began to form bonds with others who lived and worked on the ranch. Clara became a mentor and friend, offering advice, encouragement, and laughter, simple things that helped Amira feel like life could be ordinary and joyful again. Even the animals seemed to sense her care, responding to her with gentle trust and affection. Every small connection, every kind gesture, helped Amira rebuild the confidence that had been shattered by her experiences in the village. One day, as she walked through the fields carrying her baby, Amira reflected on how far she had come. Not long ago, she had been sold at an auction, treated as less than human, and faced an uncertain future. Now, she was learning to live, to care for her child, and to trust again. She realized that her strength had not been broken, only tested, and that she was capable of more than she had ever imagined. Elias watched her from a distance, seeing the determination and resilience in her every movement. He felt a quiet pride, not in controlling her, but in witnessing her reclaim her life piece by piece. For him, the decision to buy Amira at the auction had not been about power or possession. It had been about recognizing her worth, her humanity, and the love she had for her child. And as he watched her walk confidently through the fields, he knew that she was beginning to see that worth for herself. In the evenings, Amira would sit by the fire, the baby asleep in her arms, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. She reflected on the horrors she had survived, the cruelty she had endured, and the small, unexpected moments of hope that had carried her through. She realized that healing was not about forgetting the past, but about learning to live despite it. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future, not just surviving but living fully, with dignity, love, and purpose. The ranch became a sanctuary, a place where Amira could rebuild her life and find strength she had never known she possessed. Each day brought new challenges, but also new triumphs. She learned that kindness could exist even in a harsh world, that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. And most importantly, she discovered that hope, fragile though it might be, could grow and flourish when nurtured with care and patience. Amira's journey at the ranch had only just begun, but already she felt the first real sense of freedom and safety in her life. She had survived the auction, the cruelty of the village, and the hardships of childbirth, and now she was beginning to heal. With Elia's guidance, Clara's support, and the quiet strength within herself, she was learning to reclaim her life, to protect her child, and to imagine a future filled with possibility and hope. The days at the ranch became routine, but not monotonous. Each morning, Amira woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the soft rustle of the wind through the fields. The baby, now a few weeks older, slept peacefully in the small cradle beside her bed. Amira would feed him, watch his tiny hands grasp the air, and marvel at his delicate features. Every movement, every sound, filled her with both awe and determination. She had survived so much to reach this point, and now she was determined to build a life where her child could thrive safely, far from the cruelty of the auction and the harsh village she had left behind. Elias continued to give her space to adjust, always nearby when she needed guidance or support. He did not expect anything from her except that she take care of herself and her child. Slowly, Amira began to regain confidence in her own strength. She learned to handle the daily routines of the ranch, feeding the animals, tending to the garden, and helping with the household chores. Each task, though simple, carried a sense of achievement. For the first time in years, she felt a quiet pride in her own abilities, a reminder that she was capable of more than mere survival. One afternoon, while carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from the garden, Amira paused to rest under the shade of an old oak tree. She held her baby in her arms, watching him sleep peacefully, and felt a mixture of relief and longing. Relief because she and her child were finally safe, and longing because she wished she could erase the memories of the auction, the public humiliation, and the fear that had dominated her life for so long. Those memories, she realized, would not fade easily. But with each passing day, their power over her lessened. She was learning to face them without being consumed, to carry them as part of her story without allowing them to define her future. Elias approached quietly, carrying a small bundle of fresh bread. "You've been working hard," he said gently. "Take a moment to rest. You deserve it." His voice was calm, steady, and filled with understanding. Amira looked up at him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and shyness. She was still learning to trust completely, to believe that someone could offer care without expecting anything in return. She nodded silently and accepted the bread, offering a small smile in return. The bond between Amira and Elias grew gradually. They did not speak of the past unless she chose to. Instead, he encouraged her to focus on the present and the future. He asked about her ideas, her hopes, and her dreams, and listened carefully when she spoke. At first, Amira hesitated, unsure if it was safe to open up. But as the days passed, she began to share small stories about her childhood, her family, and the struggles she had endured. Each time she spoke, she felt a little lighter, as if releasing the weight of her past allowed her to breathe more freely. Clara remained a constant source of support as well. She taught Amira practical skills, like cooking, sewing, and managing the daily tasks of running a ranch. But more importantly, Clara offered emotional guidance, helping Amira recognize her own resilience and inner strength. "You have survived so much," Clara told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "You have the courage to face anything, and you are not alone. You have your child and you have people who care about you." Amira listened quietly, letting the words sink in. She had heard kindness before, but this was different. It was genuine, steady, and patient. As weeks turned into months, Amira noticed changes within herself. She no longer flinched at every loud noise, no longer felt paralyzed by fear at the thought of strangers or crowds. Her body had healed from childbirth, and her mind was slowly recovering from the trauma of the auction. She had learned to trust, at least in part, and to find moments of joy even in simple tasks. The baby's laughter, the sight of animals grazing peacefully, and the quiet beauty of the ranch at sunset became sources of happiness she had never thought possible. One day, as she tended to the horses, a young colt approached her, hesitant but curious. Amira knelt on the ground, holding out her hand, and whispered softly. The colt inched closer, eventually nuzzling her gently. In that small moment, Amira felt a surge of connection and accomplishment. She realized that caring for others, whether animals or her child, gave her a sense of purpose and strength. It reminded her that life could be nurtured, that love could exist even after great suffering. Elias observed her from a distance, quietly impressed by the grace and resilience she displayed. He had bought her at the auction not for labor or wealth, but because he recognized her humanity, her strength, and her ability to endure. Seeing her flourish in the ranch environment, taking control of her life and caring for her child and the animals, filled him with quiet pride. But he never interfered unnecessarily. He allowed her to grow on her own, understanding that true empowerment came from choice, not control. Amira's confidence continued to grow. She began to take small steps outside the immediate safety of the ranch, exploring the surrounding fields, learning the paths through the hills, and discovering the quiet beauty of the world around her. Each journey, though brief, reinforced her sense of independence. She realized that while she had once been at the mercy of others, she now had the freedom to make her own decisions, to navigate life on her own terms. The relationship between Amira and her child deepened with each passing day. She learned to anticipate his needs, to soothe him when he cried, and to celebrate his small milestones. His laughter became a source of joy that lifted her spirit even on difficult days. She understood that protecting him was not just about providing food and shelter, but about nurturing his confidence, his happiness, and his sense of security. Through caring for him, she discovered her own strength and resilience, realizing that motherhood, though challenging, gave her a purpose she had never known before. One afternoon, while sitting on the porch and watching the sun dip below the hills, Amira reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the auction, the fear, and the humiliation, and marveled at the distance she had traveled emotionally and physically. She realized that the world could be cruel, but it could also be kind. There were people who could see her worth, respect her strength, and support her without expecting anything in return. That realization gave her a sense of peace she had never known before. The baby, now awake and curious, reached out toward the sky, giggling as she held him up. Amira laughed softly, feeling a lightness in her chest that had been absent for so long. She knew that challenges would come, that life would not always be easy, but she also knew that she had the strength to face them. She had endured the unimaginable and emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. The auction, the cruelty of the village, and the fear of being alone had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. Elias joined her on the porch, sitting quietly beside her. "You have come a long way," he said softly. "I am proud of you, Amira. Not because of what you've done for me or the ranch, but because of who you are. You have faced so much and still found the courage to keep going." Amira looked at him, feeling a mixture of gratitude and humility. She nodded, understanding the weight of his words. For the first time, she felt that her life was truly her own, that she could make choices, and that she had the power to shape her own future. Over time, Amira began to dream again. She thought about what life could be like for her child, about the possibilities that lay ahead, and about the person she wanted to become. She realized that survival was no longer enough. She wanted to live fully, to experience joy, to nurture relationships, and to find meaning in every day. The ranch had given her a foundation, a safe place to rebuild, and she intended to make the most of it. The community at the ranch also became a source of strength. Clara, the workers, and even the animals offered companionship and support. Each interaction reminded Amira that she was not alone, that she had allies, and that trust, though difficult to rebuild, was possible. She learned to lean on others when necessary, to ask for help, and to give support in return. Through these connections, she discovered that life could be collaborative and nurturing, rather than a constant struggle against fear and isolation. By the end of Part 4, Amira had transformed in ways she had never imagined possible. She was no longer the frightened, exhausted woman who had been auctioned at the village square. She was a mother, a caregiver, and a strong, independent individual with the ability to shape her own destiny. The ranch had provided safety, guidance, and love, but the true transformation had come from within. Amira had found courage, resilience, and hope, qualities that would guide her and her child into a future filled with possibilities. Time at the ranch moved slowly but steadily, each day bringing new experiences, small victories, and moments of reflection. Amira had grown stronger, both in body and spirit, since the day she and her baby had arrived. The early days of fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty seemed almost like a distant memory now, though she never forgot them. Those memories remained as reminders of how far she had come, and of the resilience she had discovered within herself. The baby, now a few months old, had grown into a lively, curious child, full of energy and laughter. Each day, his laughter rang through the fields and rooms of the ranch, filling the air with joy that Amira had never thought possible in her life. She marveled at every small milestone: the first time he sat up on his own, the first tentative attempts to crawl, the way he reached out eagerly to touch the animals or the soft grass under his tiny hands. Watching him grow gave Amira a renewed sense of purpose, a deep and unshakable motivation to keep moving forward, no matter what challenges remained. Amira had also found a rhythm in her life. Mornings began with feeding her child, tending to the animals, and helping Clara with light chores around the house. Afternoons were spent exploring the ranch, learning more about the fields, the livestock, and the gentle art of caring for living things. She discovered a quiet satisfaction in these tasks, an understanding that her work, though sometimes tiring, contributed to life in meaningful ways. Each day brought new lessons, and she embraced them with the patience and determination that had carried her through the darkest days of her life. Elias continued to be a quiet and steady presence. He never imposed his will on Amira, never asked for more than she could give, and never treated her with anything less than respect. Their relationship had evolved into one of mutual trust and understanding. He encouraged her independence, celebrated her accomplishments, and gently guided her when she was unsure. Amira had come to understand that his care was not about control, but about support. And that understanding gave her the courage to begin imagining a future that was hers to shape. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Amira sat on the porch with her baby nestled against her chest. She watched the fields stretch into the distance, the animals grazing quietly, and the gentle movement of the wind through the trees. In that moment, she felt a deep sense of peace, something she had not experienced in years. The fear that had once dominated her life was no longer a constant presence. It remained in the corners of her mind, a reminder of her past, but it no longer controlled her actions or her emotions. Amira began to dream again. For the first time since the auction, she allowed herself to imagine a future filled with possibilities. She thought about her child growing up in safety, learning about the world without fear, and experiencing love and kindness in abundance. She considered her own goals, learning new skills, contributing more to the ranch, and perhaps one day helping others who had endured hardships similar to her own. These dreams, once distant and fragile, now felt tangible and achievable. The bond between Amira and her child continued to deepen. She learned to interpret his needs, to anticipate his emotions, and to nurture his curiosity and joy. Each day, she marveled at his laughter, his bright eyes, and his small achievements. Her love for him became a guiding force in her life, a source of strength that propelled her forward even on challenging days. In caring for him, she discovered her own resilience and her capacity for patience, empathy, and unconditional love. The ranch itself had become more than a place of safety. It had become a home. The animals, the fields, the routines, and the people who cared for her created an environment where Amira could flourish. She found comfort in the predictability of daily life and joy in the small surprises that came with living close to nature. She also began to form connections with others who lived and worked on the ranch, sharing tasks, stories, and laughter. These relationships reinforced her sense of belonging and reminded her that life could be both challenging and rewarding. One afternoon, while walking through the pasture with her child on her hip, Amira noticed a young horse approaching. The colt nuzzled her gently, and she laughed softly, running her hand along its soft neck. The baby cooed and reached out to touch the horse, and Amira felt a profound sense of contentment. In these small, everyday moments, she realized that life could be beautiful, even after immense suffering. She had endured cruelty and fear, yet she had arrived at a place where love, kindness, and hope were possible. Elias observed her from a distance, quietly appreciative of the progress she had made. He remembered the day he had bought her at the auction, the desperation in her eyes, and the fragile hope that had begun to grow even then. Watching her now, vibrant, capable, and loving, he felt a quiet satisfaction, not in what he had done for her but in witnessing her reclaim her life. He understood that her strength was inherent, shaped by her experiences, and that his role had been to provide a safe space for that strength to grow. As the months passed, Amira began to take on more responsibility at the ranch. She learned to manage the smaller aspects of daily life independently, from tending to the animals to preparing meals and maintaining the household. Each task she mastered strengthened her confidence and reminded her of the progress she had made. She was no longer the frightened, helpless woman who had been auctioned in the village square. She was a capable, resourceful individual, empowered by her resilience and by the support of those who cared for her. The baby, now growing into a lively toddler, became both a source of joy and motivation for Amira. She thought about the future she wanted for him and the example she hoped to set. She wanted him to grow up understanding that kindness and courage existed, even in a world that could be harsh and unjust. She wanted him to see that survival was not enough, that life could be lived fully, with dignity, love, and purpose. These thoughts guided her decisions and fueled her determination to continue building a safe, nurturing environment for both of them. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and red, Amira reflected on her journey. She thought about the auction, the fear, the humiliation, and the uncertainty that had once defined her life. She remembered the exhaustion and helplessness she had felt, the endless nights of worry and despair. And yet she also remembered the small sparks of hope, the moments of kindness, and the courage that had carried her through. Those memories, though painful, were now intertwined with the joy, safety, and empowerment she had found at the ranch. Amira realized that her life had been transformed, not by chance alone, but by the choices she had made and by the people who had believed in her. She had chosen to survive, to fight, and to care for her child. Elias had chosen to see her humanity, not her weakness, and Clara had chosen to guide and support her patiently. Together, these choices created a new reality for Amira, one filled with hope, opportunity, and the chance to build a meaningful life. The bond between Amira and Elias, while never forced or demanding, had also grown stronger. They shared mutual respect and understanding, recognizing the importance of independence and choice. Amira had learned that trust could be rebuilt, that relationships could be nurturing and empowering rather than controlling. She understood that Elia's support was not about ownership, but about creating a safe space where she could grow and thrive. As the seasons changed, Amira began to think more deeply about her own aspirations. She considered learning new skills, exploring the wider world, and finding ways to help others who had faced similar hardships. The ranch had given her a foundation, but she knew that her journey of growth and healing was ongoing. She was no longer defined by her past, but guided by her own strength, resilience, and vision for the future. One sunny morning, as she walked through the fields with her child, Amira felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had survived the auction, the cruelty of the village, and the hardships of childbirth. She had endured fear, humiliation, and uncertainty. And yet she had arrived at a place of safety, love, and empowerment. The journey had been difficult, but it had revealed her inner strength and the capacity for hope, courage, and resilience that existed within her. Amira's heart swelled as she watched her child run toward the animals, laughing and full of life. She realized that she had not only survived, but had created a life filled with love and possibility. She had reclaimed her dignity, rebuilt her confidence, and discovered the joy of nurturing life in all its forms. Her journey was a testament to the human spirit, the ability to endure, to heal, and to grow even in the face of unimaginable hardship. In the evenings, as the sun set and the ranch was bathed in a warm, golden light, Amira would sit quietly, holding her child and reflecting on the path that had brought her here. She understood that her story was not defined by the auction or by the cruelty she had faced, but by the choices she had made and the strength she had discovered. She had survived, she had healed, and she had created a future filled with hope. Amira smiled softly, feeling a sense of completeness she had never known before. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that she had the strength, courage, and support to face them. The ranch had given her safety, guidance, and care, but the true transformation had come from within. She had found hope, resilience, and love, and she intended to carry those gifts forward, creating a life of meaning, joy, and possibility for herself and her child. And so, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, Amira held her child close, feeling the warmth of his tiny body against hers. She whispered softly, "We are safe, we are free, and we will live fully and bravely together." The journey had been long and difficult, but in that moment she knew that she had arrived at a place of peace, hope, and new beginnings.